It's going to be starting up pretty soon. And then I'll start the recording too after I know that it's started the live stream. And we are live.
Great. Thank you, Patrice. I was waiting for the alert. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the MAPC Executive Committee meeting of Wednesday, April 24th, 2024. I'd like to call this meeting to order. And to start off, we're going to just take roll really quickly, and then we're going to take some items out of order. So if everyone could come off mute, please. And here we go. Imai?
Here.
Colette, absent. Kurt, absent. Keith Bergman?
Present.
Karen?
Here.
Jen Constable?
Here.
Tom Daniel? John DePriest?
Here.
Tom, I always butcher your name, Galliani?
Galligani, I'm here.
Galligani, I'm sorry.
No worries.
Mo?
Here.
Sagoon? Jared? Tabor? Angie? Gina? Steve O?
Here.
Courtney? Vandana? Claire?
Here.
Sam?
Here.
Steve Silvera? Juan absent. Elaine?
Here.
And Erin here. I believe we are still just one shy of quorum, so we are going to, at this time, take some items out of order that don't require a vote, and I'm going to move on to the Executive Director's report, and Deputy Executive Director Lizzie is here to give the report. Take it away, Lizzie.
Thanks, Erin. I appreciate it. You should have all received a copy of this. I'm going to note marginally earlier than you usually receive a copy for this. I feel like I deserve a gold star for that. But obviously it's a team effort, like everything in MAPC. And there are a few things I do want to call folks' attention to. So hold on just one second. I think, there we go. I wanted to, on the very first page, we kind of outlined some of the work that we are doing in Lexington. We have been helping to kind of lead an artist team to for a monument to honor the 250th anniversary of the Battle of Lexington. You can kind of see what the artist concepts were that were submitted. It is a difficult project. There's a lot of needles to thread and it is ongoing. But our arts and culture team is doing really terrific work there to try to help the community get to a final conclusion for this monument. I wanted to kind of highlight some things that are happening inside our clean energy team. I think folks know that we actually finished our first portion of the preliminary climate action plan. This was like a very short but very intense timeline of work and a grant that we got from EPA as part of the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant. So we were actually considered the metropolitan statistical area, and the first task was completing this PCAP. There's a ton of acronyms involved, really, really big project. And we had some really impressive recommendations that are included inside the PCAP that we submitted, and it is moving along. We will then, the next phase of the project is to actually do the final climate action plan. Alongside this portion of the climate pollution reduction grants, EPA also opened up a discretionary grant program for which we also have applied. And we applied for this implementation grant along with the city of Boston, Lowell, and Chelsea to do essentially a public housing accelerator around clean energy deployment in public housing. So we will see if we win that award. If we do, it is again an enormous grant, the vast majority of which is pass-through dollars, which would be going to do implementation of decarbonization in public housing. I also wanted to note that the Commission on Energy Infrastructure, Siting, and Permitting, great acronym of CEISP, has completed their work. I served on that commission in the MAPC seat. It was a really large commission designed to create recommendations on how we actually expedite siting and permitting for clean energy infrastructure. We were one of 3 municipal seats there. So that was MAPC, MMA, and the Mass Conservation Commissions. And I'm glad to answer questions about the recommendations or kind of where things landed. There were a lot of things that the recommendations are sort of like, we should study this more, because the commission really couldn't actually get to a set of recommendations. I think importantly, the commission did define clean energy infrastructure for the first time in a meaningful way. And I think that's important because we need to recognize that not all clean energy infrastructure is created equal. And we have to think about the considerations for clean energy infrastructure differently if it's like a giant transmission project versus whether it's something that's happening on the local level. So yeah, if you want a little nighttime reading, I think the recommendations are like 87 pages long. And I also just want to give a shout out to Jeremy Koo on our clean energy team and Sasha Scheideroff, both of whom served in a really strong support role for me to serve on the commission. I want to call out some work that's been done with our communications team together with our community engagement team around our language access guide. If you have not had a chance to take a look at it, you should. It's actually right on the front door of MAPC's website today. So if you want to navigate over there, you'll actually get to see it right away. This is a culmination of over a year's worth of work involving many different stakeholders and a broad collaboration, particularly calling out work of Naji and Sasha Parodi on our community engagement team. And then the entire comms team was actually involved in getting the project over the finish line. And the guide is really kind of a kickoff to all of the work that we're doing with our cities and towns that'll be ongoing around language access. And I can comfortably say, because they do a lot of work with our sister RPAs across the country, that we're like among the first in the nation to do something like this for our region. So really proud of that work. MAPC, together with UMass Donahue and Amy Dane, were selected to do the statewide housing plan, which was created by Governor Healy. So we're just about to kick off that work. We're really excited to be able to do that work for the Commonwealth. And we just concluded in our emergency preparedness team a shelter site visit at the Manchester Essex Regional High School. So this is kind of one of our very first big emergency preparedness projects at MAPC. And I'm pleased to report that Manchester is really excited about the work that we're doing on their emergency preparedness work. And they've invited us to kind of keep working with the town, and it's going really, really well. There's actually even going to be some local news coverage, which we will send out just to embarrass the MAPC team so folks can see them on TV, because it's going to be great. And then I think the last thing I wanted to highlight for everyone is that our public health team completed the Boston Urban Agriculture Study. This has been going on for a little over 16 months, like almost a year and a half worth of work. And it was really focused on thinking about how we advance urban agriculture. And it was focused on Boston and the Boston neighborhoods, but the goal is really to actually take some of the recommendations that were included there and think about how we can implement them in other urban settings who are trying to think more deeply about expanding urban agriculture. So there's a really tremendous list of recommendations about how we actually expand urban agriculture. And the interesting thing about that work is that it was extremely resident driven, and there was deep community engagement involved to get to those recommendations. I think I'm going to stop there on highlights. And if folks, I tried to talk slower than I usually do, but if folks have questions, I'm glad to answer them.
Thank you so much, Lizzie. Does anyone have any questions? Buzz, you came off mute.
I did. Are we still short of a quorum?
We are still one short, yes.
Okay, then I don't mind. Then I don't mind raising for Lizzie a couple of questions. First, the more well, one is the housing thing that you're about to do with Amy Dane. I appreciate Amy's incredibly good work. Her last report, however, I felt really strongly didn't reflect anywhere the actual other concerns other than discrimination that affects housing choices and housing activities and zoning in the region. And it was really it was an incredibly good piece of information showing all the reasons why, if you didn't want to have an equitable and diverse population, what you could do, and we've done most of those things. But of course, there are other reasons why municipalities do zoning, and good planning and putting planning for all sorts of good reasons ought to be recognized somewhere. And I do treasure Amy, but I think she didn't put it in the last report. And I would hope that at least there'd be some mollification of showing that it's more complex than simply all municipal governments are bad or all suburbs are bad, right? And that's really how it came up across when the Boston Foundation laid out that report. So that's one piece. The other is the CEISP. As you know, I'm particularly interested in how that happens, because we have to balance the absolute need to put in infrastructure with legitimate points of view that municipalities may have. And although I think you're right, all those 87 pages of recommendations did really leave open the opportunity to work with municipalities. That isn't what I saw from the folks at the state who were doing it. I mean, I really still fear that the current energy facility siting is just going to be given a lot more power to overrule or not consider any municipal ideas, even though municipalities get to speak. So I wonder if there's some way that we and the other regional planning agencies and maybe your municipal comrades could improve the strength of what municipalities say and how that's dealt with.
Yeah. So I'll take them each in turn. So I think, that the focus of Amy's last report was really actually looking at some of that history of redlining and discrimination. I think that's probably why that was the lens that she was using on that work. And I should clarify that our work on the statewide housing plan, we're sort of, we get to be sort of like the data geeks in the room on some of that work together with UMass Donahue. And obviously, I think we've also done a lot of work compiling some of the planning work that municipalities have already done. And the goal of that is really to help the state actually create the statewide housing plan. So I think it'll be less on sort of the policy side and more on sort of the facts and where we think we need to go as a Commonwealth, and give a little more texture to what the governor and the lieutenant governor have been saying. On CEISP, which I teed up specifically for Buzz so that he could talk about this. I just need everybody to know that I knew exactly what I was walking into. I think there was a bit, I'll share with this group, there was a bit of a difference of opinion between MMA and MAPC about moving towards a consolidated local permitting process. I think MAPC is comfortable moving towards a consolidated process. And honestly, the reason that we are is because we've heard from so many of our communities that the fact that it's different in each city or town actually makes it much harder for communities to actually think about what types of approvals they need to have at the local level. And each municipality is kind of left making those decisions on their own, which is challenging. We ended up supporting the idea of a consolidated local permitting process for cities and towns, but the piece that didn't end up making it into our recommendation was that we felt very, very strongly that this actually also needed to come with more dollars from the state and more guidance from the state, so that if we're actually going to move to something that requires something a little more consolidated on a faster timeline with a very specific set of local approvals, that the state itself actually also needs to be doing more to make it easier for cities and towns to get to that consolidated process. And so we we're really trying to push the recommendations to actually get us a little further. And I think they didn't actually make it there. You'll see, like, if you look at the CEISP recommendations, they're not included there, but certainly our advocacy will absolutely include that. We know that there's legislation moving on the House and Senate side on this. We've already talked with the chairs about sort of what role we think the state needs to play in helping to create a consolidated local process.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Great. All right. Well, I just want to kind of formally announce that we are officially at quorum. So we're going to go back. Yes, hello, hooray. So we're going to go back to the beginning of the agenda. And next up on the agenda is approval of minutes for March 20th, 2024. Can I have a motion, if willing, can I have a motion to put this on the consent agenda?
I make that
Move to put
motion.
it on the, yep.
All right. Motion made by John DePriest and second made by Tom Daniel. It is now on the consent agenda. Thank you so much. Treasurer's report. Treasurer Sam, take it away.
Thank you, President Aaron. Hi, everybody. Sam Seidel, Treasurer. We're looking at February 2024 income statement. I'll only pull out some of the things that I noticed. Overall, I'd say that the situation is strong. Things look good. I've had a chance to check in with Anna. Everything looks good. The thing that popped out to me, which I raised with her, was that our revenue, if you look across the total revenue line, it's down both for the month at about 64% and then for the year at about 77%.
They just made co-op, so.
And
I
I was just curious about that. Really, mostly that has to do, that's a matter of timing as to when the money comes in, and also an issue of pass-through dollars, which gets recognized as revenue, but only when it passes through and actually goes out the door again does it show up on the books. And so that will happen. There's a lot of pass-through money that happens towards the end of the year, which is what we're approaching now, so that it doesn't really get reflected in the February numbers. Otherwise, we're always checking the overhead rate, making sure that we're aiming towards that 123 that we want to end on at the end of the year on June 30th. And you'll see on the year to date that our overhead rate is below that at 121.1. There are two main reasons for that. We have some positions that will bill to administrative that will go to the overhead rate that haven't been filled yet. For example, a communications position that has yet to be filled. And then there are some employee benefits. We spent a lot of time talking about employee benefits last budget cycle. Those have yet to be implemented. And the reason those haven't been implemented is that it's a complex process of figuring out exactly how much, when, and at what time do those go into effect. But those will go into effect, and that will raise our overhead rate. So that sounds good. The other last thing I'll note is that our net increase to fund balance continues to be very strong, and that is in large part due to interest rates for money that we have parked in the bank, and that returns well for the agency. That concludes the Treasurer's report. Any questions, comments? If not, I'll send it back to Aaron for a motion to put on the consent agenda.
Great. Thank you, Sam. Any questions or comments now that I can see everyone? Any questions or comments on that? And if not, I will take a motion to put this on the consent agenda.
Moved.
Great. Thank you, Jen. Motion made by Jen. Is there a second? Okay, second made by Tom. Daniel, thank you for that. This item is now on the consent agenda. All right, next up, approval of the 2024 nominating committee. Take it away, Deputy Executive Director, Lizzie.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Erin. So just as a reminder of the process, our annual council meeting is on June 4th, not July 4th, that'd be fun. June 4th at the Commonwealth Museum. And at that meeting, we have our elections. And so we are, I think, later today, sending out a call for nominations to executive committee and to officers. But we also have to have, by our own bylaws, a nominating committee to recommend the officers. And so that nominating committee ends up getting approved by our executive committee, because we love nothing more than process in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So then folks who have graciously agreed to serve on the nominating committee this year, Vandana Rao, Kurt Bellavance, Steve Silvera, Yolanda Graves, and Karen Cantfield. And I think we have set our first meeting for May 8th. And so, yeah, I'll turn it back to you, Erin.
Not a problem. Thank you so much, Lizzie. So as long as there's not any significant discussion, I guess, I'm looking for a motion to also put this item on the consent agenda.
So move.
Thank you, Mo. Motion made by Mo. Is there a second?
Again, sure.
Second made by Tom for the third time today. So thank you so much, Tom. Really appreciate it. That item is now on the consent agenda. Assuming that the consent agenda passes, I want to thank those who agreed to serve on the nominating committee. As we know, it's super important. It's super important work and takes some time. So thank you so much for those that are currently sitting on the call and those who choose to watch these meetings in syndication or live, who are serving on the nominating committee. Thank you so much for that. Okay, next item on the agenda, discussion of MAPC's project inventory. I'm going to call on Ben Faust, Senior Strategist for Evaluation and Learning. I had to write it down because I was not going to remember that title for the life of me. So thank you so much, Ben, for joining us. And I know that I am not the only one on this executive committee that loves to hear you update us on data.
Wonderful.
So
Well,
take it away.
yeah, I have to refer to my signature in my email sometimes to remember what my title is. But I am going to share my screen. And I will share the presentation as long as I can get the controls out of the way. Let's see. There it is. Okay, can everybody see that? Wonderful. Okay, yes. Thank you for having me. This is probably my third or fourth year presenting this to you all. We have an ask to staff to report on their projects on an annual basis. We ask a robust amount of questions in a project database that they fill out every year. It does two things. It helps us take a step back and do this analysis every year to say, kind of like, how much is happening in different places and what are we doing in different places and how often are we working with folks? Kind of gives us the big picture of where we're directing resources and what topics we're hitting on and what topics we're not hitting on and with who. And it's not, I'll go to the next thing, just about kind of the why and the how. So, it's definitely not expected to be a punitive thing. It's really supposed to be a thing we build on curiosity, which is to say, what do you think about this data? And what do you want to do about it? What do you want to test out based on this data that could potentially improve the work we're doing and hit more places where we want to be doing work where we're not? So we enter the data in database. I like to cross-reference it with some of the funding sources we have. I clean it up. I put it in Excel, and then out of Excel comes this presentation, but also I leave it in Excel for staff and directors to analyze themselves. So that's kind of the bigger picture why we use it, the annual reason why we use it, but it also is it's a really great resource. We have this database full of information about the projects we've done, who we've worked with them on, which staff worked on them. And so if a new staff member wants to say, what was the last project we did in Salem? Because I see Tom on my first in my panel here. They can put that in and find that project. And so that is on kind of a day-to-day functional level why we do this. So, but the reason I'm here is to present you with my findings for the last 5 years. And the first thing we start with, as always, is just how many projects we did. So you'll see a couple of different references here to single municipality projects and multiple municipality projects. It helps me to just clean the data a little bit to say, because we put internal projects in here. And so just to kind of reduce the noise a little bit, single municipality means we worked one-to-one with a municipality on this project, or multiple municipality worked one-to-many with municipalities on this project. This is just, this doesn't tell us that much. It's really just a count. It doesn't say how much we spent on that project, how long we spent on that project, but we just like to do it to just get a sense of what our workload has been project-wise over the last couple of years. And so it's been pretty consistent. You'll notice that one big uptick in 2021. We think that has something to do with just how much funding was available that year. And how kind of eager folks were to use it across the region due to the influx of federal funds and state funds. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to raise your hand or chat it. The second thing we look at are just to kind of get a sense of the topics we're working on. We ask staff when they do a project to identify which metro common goal their project is advancing, and they can select more than one. But we noticed here over the last 4 or 5 years is that it's been a pretty reliable mix. While there are a couple outliers, like healthy and safe neighborhoods making up 31% of all projects or being identified across 31% of the projects over those 5 years, and economic security and arts and culture, thriving arts and culture being a little bit on the low side. For the most part, everybody's in the same bandwidth of about 20%. So it's a good representation of how Metro Common matches with our organization, how our organization is fulfilling Metro Common goals. We think the healthy and safe neighborhoods outliers, it's a big topic. It's a big goal, and a lot of folks find themselves in it, which is great. A little bit less so with economic security. The difference between economic security and economic prosperity is economic security rests with individuals. How secure are individuals in their economic security? And economic prosperity is more like economic development at the neighborhood or town level. We just don't do that much work on individual financial security, although we're doing a lot more, having got a really great opportunity through the Good Jobs Challenge that Angela Brown is running through our economic development team. So we might see that spike a little bit, but again, that's just one project, so it might not spike that much. But we know, one of the things that we're trying to do is trying to create a relative measurement for how big a project is versus just it being counted as one. The next thing we look at are our strategic priorities. So we are winding down what was a 5-year strategic plan, has turned more into an 8 or 9-year strategic plan. But at that point, we had established these four strategic priorities that we were intent on all parts of the organization advancing, and those were regional collaboration, climate change, smart growth, and equity. So it's a pretty balanced portfolio that we've seen over the last 5 years. We have seen, a decent chunk has become none work that the organization has taken on that doesn't necessarily fit with these strategic priorities, as we've kind of winding down the last plan and starting the new strategic plan. Some of these will change, and we'll kind of see how if the not applicable projects kind of get wrapped into the new strategic priorities. We also wanted to look at that in change over time. So using smart growth as an example, in 2019, 35% of projects project managers indicated were relevant to smart growth. That has gone down 10 or 20 percentage points over the last 5 years. 10 percentage points over the last 5 years. Folks say that is somewhat of just a disconnect between how they relate to the work. Some folks don't think of smart growth and equity not necessarily being in lockstep sometimes, and so we think folks have grown a little bit farther away from smart growth as a term, maybe not as a concept, and so that has some implications on how we're thinking about at least terminology for the next strategic plan. And then equity has increased. We ask folks relative to this equity question is not just like, did you do an equitable activity within your project, but was your project designed to be equitable? And it's great to see that, or to put a value judgment, I think it's great to see that the larger proportion of our projects are now leading with equity. I will direct you to the blue and orange lines here. I'm going to go back to that terminology, multiple municipalities versus single municipality projects. Obviously, we have regional collaboration as a strategic priority. We want municipalities to be collaborating on projects, but oftentimes we're designed or funded to do work with one municipality at a time. And we just think it's interesting to track that over time. It's remained pretty consistent with some dips and flows, but about 50% of our projects every year end up being single municipality where we're working one-to-one. And about 25% end up being where we work with one-to-many. And so we'd like to see that keep increasing. We think a lot of the progress that we want to make comes from municipalities working together and being aligned on objectives and policies. And so that's something that'll be a focus of the strategic plan, our upcoming one. Here is a map of again, it's just a count. So how many projects we're doing with what municipality, how many projects we've done with each municipality over the last 5 years from 2019 to 2023. I guess that's 4 years. You'll notice a lot of our work takes place in the inner core. That represents as we'll see in the following slide, obviously the biggest population in the region. And it also coincides, sorry for not describing, this actually says two things. The colors are how often we've worked with it. The darker the color, the more often we work with that municipality. You'll also notice that outlined in black are municipalities that fall under what's considered an environmental justice block group. So there's 4 criteria that 2 of which a municipality needs to hit in order to be considered an environmental justice community, where 50% of their block groups meet either a language, race, or income threshold. It's not the perfect demographic, but it kind of helps us see, how often we're working with different types of municipalities. One of the things that's changed over time here is we've definitely upped some of our work in the South Shore that used to just show a low count of projects, and that's been on the uptick for sure. And you'll notice the bottom right, those are a bunch of municipalities that we haven't worked with on a one-to-one project in a long time, at least over the last 5 years. So it's part of our mandate to work with as many municipalities in the region as possible. And we've made some overtures, and in some cases, it hasn't worked out. And so we're something that we send to staff and to have them think about what are ways to engage these communities that we haven't talked to in a little bit. To dig a little bit deeper into I broke this down by subregion. So you'll notice 2 data points here. If we look at the ICC, the inner core, which is that inner ring around Boston of municipalities, about 17 or 18 municipalities. You'll notice 2 data points. One is the population, what percent of the region's population reside in that subregion. And then the orange one, what percent of projects did we do over the time span? And so this is just to show that largely our projects kind of match with population size per subregion. And to a certain extent, that's our goal, is to make sure that we're not missing or over targeting certain subregions. And that is something for the departments to think about too as they look for planning their work out over the next couple of years. And then finally, we wanted to just break down use that environmental justice block group data to dig in a little bit about where we are doing projects. So if you look at the 2019 data set down in the lower left, that goes from the dark blue, which is less than 25% of a municipality's population lives in an EJ block group, in environmental justice block groups, all the way to the light blue, which is over 75% of the population lives in EJ block groups. So it chunks the municipalities out by how much of their population lives in our environmental justice block groups. The darkest blue is they don't really have any living of that population, and the light blue is they have more than 70%. And so you'll see that we do a lot of our work, over 50% of our work year to year happens in municipalities with a large population, that a population considered environmental justice population. So we recognize that the solutions to the region's problems don't always go through those municipalities, that every municipality has a role in the safety, wealth, and health of residents around the region. But we all
Hold on, Ben. Did the sound go out for Ben for anyone else?
Yeah, Ben, we kind of lost you.
Yeah. Yes.
Was it on the slide or was it slides ago?
No,
just
just now.
like within the last
okay.
10 seconds.
Well, that's good. I'm glad I made it this far, because the overcast and my bandwidth doesn't usually coincide well. So just saying that the pathway to success at the regional level doesn't necessarily mean 100% of resources to municipalities with high EJ populations, but we do put some value into going to where we're needed. And we think that there is something to be said and something for our staff to look into when they think about who we're doing our work with and which municipalities and why. Yeah, and so that's the overview. That's my last slide. Happy to take any questions or hear any reflections on what people heard or saw.
Great. Thank you so much, Ben. And maybe you could stop sharing so I could see everyone in case there's any questions. That would be really helpful. Thank you so much. I have a question that we'll start off with, I guess. Why not? I understand that you presented to directors and managers about your findings. Was there any reaction to things that surprised people, or is there any data sets that were like really that gave pause to members of the staff?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Erin. I have a couple slides that are more department specific that I didn't share, because I think it kind of gets in the weeds of like what, and potentially folks can draw conclusions for like how departments are doing. But while I did present all of these, and folks did find it useful to kind of think, especially around I think the Metro Common goals is just to kind of rationalize why certain ones are being advanced and why not. The ones that they really resonated with them was around how often they're collaborating with each other. And so, they can kind of see how frequently they're working with their respective their colleagues on certain topics. And so I think that kind of that inspires them to be a little bit more proactive in who they're working with and why. What was another one that the strategic priority ones is usually interesting to folks. I think it's both a question of terminology and a question of perspective of just like, what it comes down to a certain extent of what folks consider equitable and what folks consider smart growth. It's an interesting conversation that I think we've had here before when I've presented this is how specifically are we targeting both of those strategic priorities, and what counts? And are there elements of sustainable development that are slightly different from while we've probably tried to inhibit or inhabit that idea when we're talking about smart growth, being more explicit about the equitable side of smart growth, I think has been a really good conversation at the organizational level.
I would also just offer particularly on this question, I think, Ben highlighted the places where our our staff was really kind of interested in looking further. I think part of the context of that is that we are having so many conversations about our strategic plan and our strategic priorities and what is the work that we want to be doing over the course of the next 5 years to meet those goals that we've set for ourselves. And I think across the board, we've heard over and over again from our directors and managers that they want to actually be working more closely together, but not just because they like each other, but because like they want the work itself to be more interdisciplinary. And I think our, new strategic priorities actually reflect that interdisciplinary desire. And so I expect that over the course of the next several years, you'll actually start to see that as part of our project work, as our directors are really trying to like push themselves to actually be thinking about the intersectional work for our cities and towns. And, again, it's reflective of what's happening in our communities. Like our housing issues are our public health issues, our climate issues are our public health issues. And so you're seeing that interdisciplinary pieces happen on the ground. And so then our work reflects that too. So I expect that through line will sort of shift a little bit over the course of the next few years.
Thanks,
Awesome.
Lizzie.
Thank
Yeah, Aaron, I'll just add one more thing because I think
Okay.
it's relevant to this group too, is the multiple municipality projects versus the single municipality projects. It's like, some of our funding kind of comes in either intentionally or unintentionally through single municipality kind of pathways, like where we feel either obligated to work with one municipality at a time. And I guess I'd put that out, maybe rhetorically to all you, is like, what are ways that we can generate more multiple municipality projects? Like what are pathways to some of your municipalities working together on something as opposed to just singularly on one planning project?
Great. Thank you. Imai, your hand.
Okay, thank you. So first of all, very nice work, Ben. Very, very informative project tracking there and good look inside the agency. On the last slide, it was good to see so much work being focused on the highest EJ populations, but then it fell off rather quickly. And particularly noticeable to me was like the next highest, the 51 to 75% EJ population actually in the last year had the lowest share of projects. And I'm wondering, is that a concern to the agency in trying to reach other EJ populations? Or if like you look at the data a different way, it's probably maybe not a problem if you look at it by hours, money, resources. And then, as to maybe why is that, like, because the EJ populations the highest ones do get a lot of focus, so they're ending up getting a lot of projects, and the municipalities that are smaller and more affluent, they all just have excellent town planners like me who are so good at getting them projects and dollars that they don't need to worry, or is it kind of something like a middle child syndrome? The older one takes care of itself, the youngest one gets all the attention, and the two in between are just kind of maybe overlooked.
Yeah, great question. I think what we can all agree to is that Weston has a great planner. So that's number one.
Thank you. Vote on that, please. So moved. No.
I mean, all of your caveats were appreciated. It's still just a count. We don't account for resources or money, and then looking to work with staff on how to do that a little bit more accurately. I could go back if you can remember the map that I did show. A lot of that 75% EJ block groups and up, or it's like 70% of the population is living in an EJ block group. That's the data point. That's like most of the inner core. And it just happens to be that we end up doing a lot. Like that's the group that seems the most willing and the most ready to do projects with us across our different departments. And our projects come less frequently from some of the smaller municipalities that are in maybe that even like, I don't want to generalize the 75% to the 0-ish percent population living in EJ block groups, and it's a good observation. I didn't make that, Imai, so I'll go back and kind of do a little bit more due diligence around what municipalities fall under that 75% to 50%, and maybe I do send that out to staff and just say, or to the directors and say, this is a group of municipalities, while maybe not number one on our list as we consider the places with the biggest EJ population, but definitely something meriting a little bit more interest.
I think, Ben, The other piece I think it's just worth noting here is like some of the time frame was that there were major dollars available specifically to focus on EJ communities, particularly around COVID. And so I think some of that work where there were like dollars that were actually coming from the federal government funneled through MAPC to support EJ communities, and even at the block level to actually like, I'm thinking of like all of our food security work, for example. And so that I think also spiked it. I will also say though, Ima, I think the point that you're making about sort of that like middle child piece, that to me is, it's really about the capacity issue. And so it's not that munis that have that sort of like middle tier of EJ populations don't want to be doing that deeper work. It's that they're playing whack-a-mole on all the other issues. And so, and I think that is particularly true for our sort of middle resourced communities. It's that capacity place. And so I think it's a good flag for us to be thinking, because it's something that we're thinking about all the time, is like how we help on the capacity side. But there's also this specific reason to help on the capacity side so that we can help those communities and support them in doing deeper work with their EJ populations too. So it's also a good flag. But I do feel like some of it is probably also reflective of the timing. We're going to have a new designation of what our communities are. It's going to be like the oldest sibling. We're not going to talk about like emerging growth. We're just going to talk about middle children.
Yeah, perceived birth order for sure.
Exactly.
Thank you both.
It just really helps give context to everything.
It does. Everybody understands it.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, great. Thank you so much for that clarity, and thank you so much for that additional information. Oh, Jen, I was going to say, anyone else have any questions? Jen, take it away.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you, Ben. Very interesting report, and I'm glad to see that the South Shore is stepping up a little bit more and being represented. I'm just curious, in the regional collaboration, I'm not sure if the research went to, or the data collected went to this level. Did you see any trends in the types of projects that that communities were collaborating on regionally?
It's a good question. We do ask for project type, although the diversity of our projects has made it somewhat difficult to draw comparisons across project type because there's so many now. But that's interesting. It would be worth doing like a more of a kind of qualitative analysis of which projects do we have more collaboration than others, for sure. So I don't have that, but I'm interested.
Anecdotally, I feel like the places where we have the most collaboration is around public health projects, and then communities that are interested in exploring shared services. And I use those words very carefully because the communities that are interested in exploring shared services do not always ultimately implement shared services, but they like to think about them together, and then generally there's like often a situation where they're like, no, actually we're each our own unicorn and we can't like share. But the public health space, and I do feel like, again, COVID really like made that easier in some ways because communities actually had to share resources. And in some instances, it did actually naturally lead to an evolution of thinking about projects together for shared services. We're also doing some work specifically directed by DPH around field training around public health and inspectional services, which I think more and more munis are starting to think of in that shared services space as a way to think about cross-municipal work, because it's too much to have 351 different inspectional services programs.
That's a good point, Lizzie, and I think that even goes to kind of further to Eric Hove's point around climate projects. Like there can be a group of our departments, like our more traditional planning departments, that kind of just fall into the one-to-one mode because they're doing HPPs, or they're doing housing production plans, or they're doing open space and rec plans, and they're kind of traditionally one-to-one, where some of the other departments who are funded somewhat differently have more flexibility around seeking out more collaborative work. So that's been something that directors have reflected on in the past as well.
That's great. And that's part of the rationale behind the question too, is I'm wondering if that data is available, how much it might help MAPC drive which projects it chooses, climate change is one of those areas for sure. And so thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, we are starting to think about that in terms of how we might consider allocating future TAP resources, particularly to try to direct more of the multi-municipal projects.
Great. Buzz, I see you come off mute. Do you have a question?
Thank you. I'm glad somebody looks at my microphone. I appreciate it. Actually, my biggest takeaway here really is this issue, the idea of multi versus single municipality. So Ben, great presentation, and moreover, great focus on that as well. Given and over the years, we've fluctuated a little bit about really being a regional planning agency, really focusing on things like the inner core and regional pieces. And I guess I can say this bluntly, following the money, which really does lead us to do a lot of individual work. I bring this up for Lizzie as a matter of where we might be wanting to advocate more. That is, when you think about some of the things we do for individual towns, the MVP, the open space and rec plans, even economic development, where we at one point were working with the chambers, we could push harder to have multifamily, multi-municipality activity. And I wonder if we might refocus on that. And I know we do statewide work through MARPA, and maybe it takes maybe Ben a half a comment, or Lizzie a half a comment on what we really do statewide as not only the 900-pound gorilla, but also the clear leader of the 13 regional planning agencies.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually really interesting that you'd raise this. I do also see the chat about making sure that we're moving this along so we can get to the vote. But it's an interesting piece. I think some of our sister planning agencies across the state are sort of feeling a little tired of our 800-pound gorilla-ness and want to do a lot of that work on their own, which is, it only makes the state stronger when that happens. And I think that's actually a really good thing. On the multi-municipal piece, I feel like we as an agency can be doing some more. And I think it's part of the reason why the strategic planning work is so important, to try to help talk to our cities and towns about how we think more regionally and how we get to actually that multi-municipal work, because multi-municipal and regional are not necessarily the same. They can be, but they're not necessarily the same. And if we want to actually move towards that regional influence and impact for our communities, I think we need to actually do a little bit more education work to tell communities that this is possible.
Great, thank you so much, Ben, and all the work of the agency. I'm sure I speak for the executive committee when I say thank you for your presentation, your data, your expertise on this. And I always look forward to your presentation. So thank you so much, Ben.
Appreciate it. Bye, everybody.
All right, great. Next up on the agenda, other business not known to the posting of this agenda. Lizzie, do you have anything?
I do have two very quick things. I just want to remind folks that the House is taking up the budget today. If you have not already, you should definitely be in touch with your representatives. We are seeking an increase in DLTA. We know it's a tight budget year, but lots of things are going to get a bump, and we want to be one of them. And then we're also seeking a small change to language that would allow us to continue to help cities and towns apply for state level grants, which is like a really important piece that was sort of, Elaine's nodding. She wants the RPAs to be able to help cities and towns apply for state level grants. And then the other piece I just wanted to remind folks is that the housing bill is still moving. There's a lot going on with that legislation. We are seeing like a very strong opposition to the transfer fee, even though if it's included in the legislation, it'll be a local option. So to the extent that you feel comfortable reaching out to your legislators to talk about sort of that local option piece, we would also strongly encourage folks to do that. And I offer those because Leah is in the State House today trying to get us more money for the Shannon grant, so she couldn't be on the call today and asked me to share that with everyone.
That is great. And Lizzie, I believe you sent a communication earlier today reminding us about the council meeting. I know it was talked about earlier in the meeting, but if people could just make sure it's on your calendars, make sure you attend, and really be able to share the annual meeting in person this year.
That would be great.
And RSVP, so we know you're coming. because I'd love to see everyone in person. Great. If there is nothing else not known at the time of posting the agenda, we good, Lizzie? Okay, great. So at this time, I'm going to ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda and to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
All right, I'm going to say the motion was made by Imai and it was seconded by Claire, who took Tom Daniel's job. Maybe next time, Tom. Okay, is there any questions or comments before we do roll? Awesome, really appreciate it. Everyone come off mute, please. Here we go. Imai.
Aye.
Colette is absent. Kurt is absent. Keith.
Aye.
Karen.
Aye.
Jen.
Aye.
Tom D.
Aye.
John. DePriest. Okay. Tom G.
Aye.
Mo.
Aye.
Sagoon. Jared. Tabor. Angie.
Aye.
Gina. Steve O.
Aye.
Courtney. Vandana. Claire.
Here.
Pam?
Aye. Excuse me.
Aye.
Steve S. Juan is absent. Elaine.
Aye.
And Erin, aye. And with that, the meeting is adjourned at 12:31. Thank you so much, everyone.